It was the middle of winter in Gore, Kentucky, and the town seemed frozen in time. The streets, empty and desolate, were blanketed with a thick layer of snow, the quiet disturbed only by the sound of a biting cold wind that swept across the town. The night was dark, only the faint light from the small police station flickered in the distance. A lone black figure stood just outside, lingering by the door like a shadow, almost as if it were waiting for something or someone. He had been standing there for what seemed like an eternity, and yet no one had come to approach him. Inside the station, Sarah Johnson sat behind the desk, her eyes periodically drifting toward the window. The young man had been standing out there for nearly half an hour now, and something about it didn't sit right with her. The cold, especially in the dead of winter, was unforgiving, and she could tell from his posture that the young man was shivering despite the thick layers of clothing he wore. Her eyes scanned the empty office, the other officers having gone home for the night. She was alone on duty. The temperature outside had dropped to a chilling -8 degrees Celsius, the frost starting to settle on the windows. Her concern deepened with every minute that ticked by. She couldn't fathom why anyone would stand out there in this weather for so long, especially so late at night. It wasn't just the cold, though. There was something about the young man that made her uneasy, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. Finally, Sarah couldn't ignore her instincts any longer. She stood up from her chair, her boots clicking softly against the floor as she walked to the door. As soon as she opened it, a gust of wind rushed in, making her flinch slightly. She quickly motioned toward the young man, urging him inside. "Hey, it's freezing out there. Come on in," Sarah said, her voice warmer than she intended. "Get out of the cold. Have some tea. You'll catch your death out there standing like that." The young man turned toward her, his face pale and flushed with cold, his eyes wide as if startled by her sudden invitation. He hesitated for a moment, but then his body, stiff with cold, seemed to give in. He shuffled toward the door, taking slow, careful steps, his feet dragging as though every movement was a struggle. Once inside, the warmth of the police station seemed to engulf him. The gentle hum of the heater kicked on, and the warmth wrapped around his chilled skin like a comforting embrace. Sarah motioned for him to sit in one of the chairs near the desk while she went to prepare the tea. "You look frozen," Sarah remarked as she moved about the small kitchen area. "I'll make you some tea to warm you up." She returned moments later with a steaming cup of tea and handed it to him. The young man's hands were trembling as he took it, and he carefully cradled the mug as if it were the most precious thing in the world. He sat there in silence, the warmth of the tea slowly seeping into his body, though his body still seemed to be fighting against the chill that had taken root in his bones. The silence stretched on for a moment before Sarah spoke again, her tone softer this time. "Are you okay?" she asked. "What's going on? You're out here late at night, in this weather, alone." The young man took a deep breath, and his eyes dropped to the cup in his hands. His fingers tightened around the mug, but his hands continued to shake. He looked up at her, his eyes clouded with weariness. "I came here to look for work," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I heard there were jobs in Gore, but it didn't work out. I thought maybe I could find something, anything, but I didn't." Sarah could hear the frustration in his voice, the weight of despair that hung heavily in the air. She noticed how his shoulders sagged, the weariness of someone who had been carrying the burden of too many disappointments for too long. It was clear he wasn't just hungry for food, he was starved for hope. "Have you eaten anything today?" she asked gently, though she already had a feeling she knew the answer. The young man nodded slowly, his lips parted as if to speak, but the words seemed to get stuck. Finally, he managed a small shake of his head. "Just a piece of bread this morning," he admitted, his voice tinged with shame. "That's all I had." Sarah's heart ached for him. She immediately opened the desk drawer and pulled out a lunchbox from her bag. Without hesitation, she placed it in front of him. "Hey, please, eat something," she said. "You look like you haven't had a proper meal in days." The young man hesitated at first, clearly embarrassed, but the hunger in his eyes was undeniable. His hands shook as he slowly opened the lunchbox. Inside was a simple sandwich, nothing fancy, just enough to give him some nourishment. He ate it quickly, almost ravenously, as though he hadn't eaten in days. Sarah watched him quietly, her heart heavy with the knowledge that there was so much more at play here than just his hunger. Once he finished, he set the empty box down on the table, his eyes still avoiding hers. "I don't know what to do," he said, his voice quieter now. "I came here to find a job, but they wouldn't hire me. They said my blood pressure was too high. It could be dangerous, they said. I can't even afford the medication." His words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. Here was a young man who wasn't just struggling to find work, he was fighting against something much more insidious. His health. His future. "What do you mean, you can't afford the medication?" she asked, her brow furrowed. "I don't have any money left," he replied, his voice barely audible. "The bus ticket here, the little money I had for food, it's all gone. I had hoped to find something, just enough to get me through the week. But now," he trailed off, unable to finish his sentence. Sarah's heart broke for him. She could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of his life pressing down on him. It wasn't just the hunger or the cold that had worn him down, it was the crushing sense of failure that had followed him for so long. And now, without the means to even take care of his health, he seemed to be at the end of his rope. "Do you have anyone you can call?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Any family? Friends?" He shook his head, his face clouded with sorrow. "No, I don't have anyone. Not really. Everyone I knew from the orphanage has their own life now. I've been alone for a long time. I've never had anyone to turn to." The words hung in the air, heavy with loneliness. Sarah felt a pang of sorrow deep in her chest. She couldn't stand the thought of someone so young, with so much potential, feeling so utterly alone. "I can't just send you back out there in this weather," Sarah said, her voice fine but gentle. "Especially not without your medication. You're not going to survive out there." The young man looked up, his eyes filled with confusion and a glimmer of something else. Hope, perhaps? He shook his head, clearly unsure of what Sarah meant. "I'll help you," she said, her voice resolute. "But you have to promise me something." He looked at her, his eyes still clouded with disbelief. "Promise? What do you mean?" Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out a small envelope, carefully placing it in front of him. She spoke in a calm, matter-of-fact tone. "This is for you," she said. "It's enough money for your train ticket back to New York and enough for your medication. Take it. But here's the thing, you don't have to repay me. You don't owe me anything. But someday, when you're able to, you need to help someone else. That's how you repay this." The young man's eyes widened. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Tears welled up in his eyes as he reached for the envelope, his hands trembling. "I can't accept this," he stammered. "I don't deserve it." "No," Sarah insisted, shaking her head. "You do. You deserve it more than you know. And you'll repay it, not to me, but to someone who needs it. You're not alone in this world, even if it feels that way right now." The young man's heart felt like it was about to burst. He didn't know how to respond, but Sarah's words touched something deep within him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Warmth. Hope. "I'll drive you to the station," Sarah added, seeing the uncertainty in his eyes. "You can't walk in this cold. Your blood pressure, remember." He opened his mouth to protest, but Sarah cut him off. "No, I won't hear it. Get in the car." As they drove through the quiet streets of Gore, the snow was coming down even harder, blanketing everything in a thick layer of white. The world outside was silent, except for the soft hum of the patrol car and the occasional gust of wind. Inside the car, it was warm, the heater blowing gently. The young man sat quietly beside Sarah, unsure of what to say. He was overwhelmed by the kindness she had shown him, and the warmth of her words and actions made his heart swell with emotion. When they arrived at the train station, Sarah turned to him, her eyes soft. "Take care of yourself," she said, her voice full of sincerity. "And remember, when you get to New York, find somewhere warm, and if you ever need anything, call me. Here's my number." She handed him a small scrap of paper with her contact information written on it. The young man took it in his hands, his voice trembling with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice breaking. "Just help someone else when you can," Sarah said, her smile gentle. "That's all the thanks I need." As he walked toward the train, the snow continued to fall, each flake shimmering in the streetlights like a tiny beacon of hope. And as Michael Harris boarded the last train to New York, he made a vow to himself. He would not forget Sarah's kindness. He would carry it with him, always, and when the time came, he would pass it on to someone else who needed it.